Brigitte Bardot's Cause of Death, comprehending the last chapter of a 91-year life. One of the most significant periods in contemporary cultural history came to an end with Brigitte Bardot's death at the age of 91. She was more than just a movie star for decades. She was a contradiction, a symbol, a provocateur, and eventually a voice for causes she felt were more important than celebrity. Almost immediately after Brigitte Bardot's death was announced, one question arose: what caused her death? Like a lot of Bardot's life, the solution isn't wrapped in pomp or dramatic revelation. There was no unexpected mishap, no public health emergency, and no startling discovery. Rather, her passing signifies the peaceful end of a lengthy life molded by passion, weariness, fortitude, and aging. Brigitte Bardot did not pass away from a sickness that was made public. No official medical authority, family member, or representative of the foundation disclosed a specific medical cause. For someone of her age who devoted her later years to passionately defending her privacy, this lack of detail is not out of the ordinary. It is reasonable to say that, after years of deteriorating health and physical weakness, her death was consistent with age-related natural causes. At the age of 91, Brigitte Bardot passed away, ending a chapter that influenced both French cinema and world culture. There was no spectacle, controversy, or dramatic farewell remarks associated with her departure. Rather, it emerged subtly, similar to the lifestyle she opted for following her departure from celebrity. Her last moments were more about tranquility than performance for a woman who once embodied visibility, desire, and controversy. Bardot's death was a natural consequence of elderly age and long-term health decline, even if there was no dramatic or unexpected medical episode associated with her demise. She lived away from the public eye in her latter years, surrounded by animals and carers in her long-term home in southern France. She was mentally strong, but physically frail. Time eventually overtook her body, which had once been burdened by worldwide obsession, something that even legends cannot surpass. Being old is a conclusion rather than a weakness, and after living life to the fullest, Bardot arrived at hers. Bardot allegedly battled recurrent health problems that are typical of nonagenarians, such as weariness, respiratory strain, and decreased mobility, in the months preceding her death. These were slow indicators of a body wearing down after decades of endurance rather than abrupt crises. There was no sudden fall, no accident, and no terrible disease. Her demise was a reflection of what medical professionals frequently refer to as natural causes, which are the body's systems finally failing after a long existence. The turmoil of her early years contrasts with this serene conclusion. During a period when women were supposed to be seen but not heard, Bardot rose to fame. She broke that rule by being both fiercely loud and unabashedly visible. It took a toll, and fame came quickly and heavily. Early in life, she experienced emotional difficulties as a result of the burden of continual attention, objectification, and judgment. She overcame significant disenchantment with celebrity society, mental weariness, and suicide attempts. She continued to live nevertheless. Her length of life, in spite of everything, is what made her passing particularly meaningful, not how she passed away. Bardot attained an age that many people never reach in spite of rigorous examination, personal suffering, political conflict, and decades of public condemnation. Her longevity is indicative of her ideological, emotional, and physical endurance. Bardot was no longer the world's favorite cinematic fantasy by the time death arrived. Decades before, she had already buried that persona. She left a profession that most would have clung to when she quit, from acting in her late 40s. Her later years were characterized by agitation, seclusion, and an almost militant commitment to animal welfare. In many respects, her body survived long enough to see the entire trajectory of her impact, from adoration to rejection, from idol to outcast, and ultimately to historical figure. Therefore, there is no single medical phrase that can adequately describe her cause of death. It was the inevitable end of a life that burned fiercely and persevered obstinately. She eventually succumbed to age, as everyone inevitably does, regardless of rebellion, fame, or beauty. The solitude she leaves behind is all that's left. Brigitte Bardot did not pass away in the limelight. She passed away in a life she had purposefully made smaller, quieter, and more regulated, distant from film sets and flashing cameras. That decision is important. It demonstrates that she regained control of her own conclusion, something she was not allowed to do for a large portion of her early years. Her passing compels contemplation, understanding, not just adoration or censure. She was a woman who was ahead of her time before becoming out of step with it. She received praise, condemnation, criticism, fines, and celebrations. But none of that followed her after she passed away. Age, infirmity, and finally rest followed her. Brigitte Bardot did not ultimately pass away as a controversy or a symbol. She passed away as a human being whose body had just run out of energy. And that might be the most truthful conclusion. Her films will still be shown. There will always be controversy about her name. Her legacy will always be complex, unsettling, and potent. However, her death itself was straightforward. There was no drama, intrigue, or spectacle. Time is simply acting as it usually does. Brigitte Bardot led a loud life, withdrew purposefully, and passed away in silence. Her whole life is defined by that contrast. Now that she has passed away, the world is left wondering about the lingering effects of her life rather than how she passed away. A body that too long carried too much. One must first comprehend how completely Bardot's existence engulfed her body in order to comprehend her death. Bardot was constantly in the spotlight when she was a teenager. Early and fiercely, fame arrived. Across continents, her image was devoured, analyzed, revered, and condemned. During her cinematic career, she worked tirelessly despite intense pressure, unstable emotions, and abuse from the media. Long before she turned 40, Bardot herself acknowledged on numerous occasions that her fame had a negative impact on her physical and mental well-being. She was already emotionally, physically, and psychologically spent by the time she resigned from filmmaking in her late 30s. She had endured years of intrusive news coverage, depression, and childhood suicide attempts. Despite her departure from performing, she did not abandon, struggle. She was similarly passionate about animal activism in her senior years. She battled governments, challenged industries, worked tirelessly, donated her personal wealth to causes, and carried emotional weight well into old life. Bardot never led a kind life. Additionally, bodies that are subjected to such stress eventually suffer consequences. Health decline in her later years. Bardot lived a solitary life in southern France during her last decades, surrounded more by animals than by people. She avoided interviews, made few public appearances, and tightly controlled who could access her medical records. It was known that as Bardot became older, she experienced worsening respiratory issues, exhaustion, and overall physical frailty. Over the years, she had been admitted to the hospital multiple times due to age-related issues, especially in her late 80s and early 90s. These were described as instances that showed a body slowing down, rather than as life-threatening. Emergencies. She also freely admitted that she was physically extremely tired of life, not out of hopelessness, but out of acceptance. She described growing older as something she neither feared nor idealized. Longevity was not Bardot's goal. The version of herself that the world anticipated remembering has already passed away. No trauma, no unexpected event. Crucially, at the moment of her death, there was no medical emergency, no accident, and no violent cause. She didn't pass out in public, wasn't hurried to the hospital, wasn't surrounded by equipment, and didn't require extensive care. Those close to her described her death as quiet and serene, in contrast to the commotion that had surrounded her notoriety. This clearly implies that spontaneous physiological shutdown, which is common at her age, was the cause of her death. The human body reaches a point at age 91 when several systems start to deteriorate. The heart becomes fatigued, lung capacity decreases, immunity declines, and recovery from even mild stress becomes impossible. In these situations, death is rarely ascribed to a single spectacular reason. Rather, it is the pinnacle of time itself. Why there was no announcement of a cause. Some people believe that something is being concealed when there is no specified cause. In actuality, it is a reflection of Bardot's persistent resistance to make her body public property. Throughout her childhood, she was subjected to unwanted photography, analysis, and sexualization. She was adamant in her old age that she would not allow death to become just another show. Her foundation made a conscious decision that was in line with her ideals by emphasizing who she was, rather than how she passed away. In France, it is also customary for families to conceal medical details, particularly when an elderly person passes away from natural causes. There was no public interest or legal justification for revealing medical information. Psychological aspects, a completely lived life. It is impossible to overlook the psychiatric aspect of Bardot's last years, even though she did not commit suicide or self-harm. She frequently expressed her disconnection from the contemporary world. She detested journalism, politics, celebrity worship, and modern culture. She had more memories than anticipation in her life. This indicates that she no longer clung to life because of fear, not that she wanted to die. Medical doctors are aware that the body frequently follows an individual's emotional closure. Appetite declines, the depth of sleep increases. Completion, not depression, causes the desire to fight to wane. Many years ago, Bardot had already said the world farewell. Not a disaster, a final thought. It must be made quite clear that Brigitte Bardot's passing was not tragic. Something stolen too soon is implied by tragedy. Bardot lived for 9 decades. Global recognition, love, heartbreak, reinvention, controversy, loneliness, dedication, and purpose were all experiences she had. At the pinnacle of her career, she abandoned acting to pursue a different legacy. Her promise was not diminished by her passing. It brought an already written story to a finish. The significance of her death. Bardot's death represents the end of a cultural age in which women paid a high price for visibility, symbols were created without filters, and fame was cruel. In the purest sense, time was her cause of death. After intensity, time. Time following fatigue, time following the impact. Her demise is not defined by illness. Her legacy is framed by no diagnosis. She didn't lose a battle. She just reached the inevitable conclusion of a life lived to the fullest. The last truth. In response to the question, what caused Brigitte Bardot's death? This is the most truthful response. She passed away because she was 91 years old. Her body had endured decades of stress, passion, defiance, and purpose, and nothing more was expected of it. In the end, there was no controversy. There is no mystery to be solved, no darkness to reveal. After a life that had expressed everything, there was only quiet.